Okay, hopefully this is the fifth tense you are having a look at. You should have worked through the present tense, the perfect tense, the imperfect tense, and the future tense by now. If you haven't, I suggest you go back and study those because you will certainly need to have studied the future and the imperfect tense to make the conditional fairly easy. I say tense, but actually the conditional is a mood. Don't worry too much about the difference. It's just the terminology that we're going to use. The conditional mood is fairly easy to recognize because it's given away by the word would in English and some aspect of a condition being placed upon an event. So we often see the word if. And if we look at an example of the conditional mood, we've got a sentence like, if I had a lot of money, I would buy a big house. And that I would buy is the conditional. Two words in English, would buy, will be translated with one word in French, just like we've seen in some of the other tenses, like the future tense, where I will be is just je serai, one word. So the if often gives away the fact that we've got a conditional and the would. But also, if you think about it, the word conditional is a clue as to the content because there is a condition on buying the big house, and that condition is having a lot of money. Okay, so if a certain condition is fulfilled, then the main idea of buying the big house will become true and would turn a would into a will. So we also have very often an imperfect tense with the conditional there, and that's important to note as well. So another reason why it's important that you study the imperfect tense before going on to do this, because you'll very rarely get sentences where you only need a conditional. You very often need the imperfect as well, because the if clause will have the imperfect tense in. If I had a lot of money, that's clearly something which theoretically would be in the past. Okay. So we form the conditional very easily if we know the future tense and the imperfect tense, as I said before, because we are mixing and matching here. There are no new bits to learn with the conditional mood, and that's the good news. You just add the future stem to the imperfect endings. It's as simple as that. So if you know your future tense, your imperfect tense, it's a doddle. Let's see how that looks in practice. We need to check, first of all, whether the verb is irregular in the future tense. And you can do that on the back of the higher tier learning mat, or you can do it in a dictionary or with certain online tools. It's worth getting used to the verb section in your dictionary so that you can find out where the irregular verbs are in the tense that you're using. Then once we've checked that, if it is irregular, we will take that irregular stem, or if it's not irregular, if it works normally, we take the infinitive, just like we do with the future tense. And just like the future tense, the RE verbs lose their final E. We take the final E off. So all our stems, again, will be ending in the letter R. If you have a stem that doesn't end in the letter R, you are wrong. So it's just the same as the future up to that point, and then we add the correct imperfect tense ending. So remind ourselves of those. If we take the verb jouer, which is the infinitive, out of the dictionary, means to play. Jouer is perfectly regular, so we go straight to point 2 on this list here, because we can check later and we'll see that it's not irregular. So we take the whole infinitive. Okay, so it's not an RE verb, so we don't need to lose the E. Okay, and we'll replicate that for all the 6 persons, I, you, he, she, we, you, or they. And then we come to point 3 and we add the imperfect ending. And those are AIS, AIS, AIT, IONS, IEZ, AINT. Je jouerai, tu jouerais, il jouerait, elle jouerait. Nous jouerions, vous joueriez, il jouerait, elle jouerait. And those would be the translations. And just as I reminded you when we looked at the imperfect tense, remember 4 of those endings are pronounced exactly the same. E, and e. It's only the ion and the ie that are pronounced differently. So don't be tempted to try and make jouerai sound different from jouerai, because they should sound exactly the same. I would play, they would play. Right, that's all there is to it. If you can follow that, you can put any verb in the conditional form, in the conditional mood. And it's worth having a look at some of those irregular verbs as well. So, because the irregular future tense stems are what is used to make the conditional mood, the irregular verbs in the future tense are going to be the ones that are irregular in the conditional. So let's just have a look and find those on the learning. Okay, so here in our 5th column we can see jouer, to play, what we just worked out, okay? And the endings obviously are the same for the IR and RE verbs, and you can see there that the E has been taken off the stem, the infinitive rather, vendre. Okay, so here are our irregular future tenses, and it's the bit in bold that are our future stems. So for all of those, we would take those bold future stems for our conditional, and it reminds us of that there, okay? And if we look at the endings and the difference in the endings, we can see with the regular verbs as well that there is very little difference between the future tense and the conditional tense in French. The future tense ending is AI, the conditional tense ending is AIS, and the stem is of course the same. So there is only one letter difference between the future and the conditional. And because you do not hear that final letter, they sound exactly the same in the je form. So je jouerai, je jouerai. And you can only tell the difference when you write it down, which is something to watch out for as well. And it also means that spelling is vitally important, because that one little S, that one S difference, changes the meaning from will to would. Okay, so let's take some of these future tenses and let's compare them. So, je serai, I will be, and je serai, I would be. Okay, j'aurai, I will have, and j'aurais, I would have. Just an S difference. So if you know the future irregulars, you've got the conditional as well. Je ferai, I will do, I would do. J'irai and j'irai, I will go, I would go. And here, when we have the modal verbs, we get a bit interesting. Je voudrais, I will want, and there's that very familiar je voudrais. And you can see, technically, I would want, but you will know it as I would like, okay? And some of these modal verbs have slightly alternative translations in English, okay? So that's the stem, that's the root of the word, je voudrais, that you've seen from the beginning of learning French. It is the conditional mood of the verb vouloir, to want, je voudrais. And if we look at the other modals, they're quite interesting as well, because je pourrais is I will be able to, and je pourrais in the conditional, I would be able to, of course, can be translated as I could as well. I could. And of course, whenever you say I could, you don't necessarily mean that you are in the conditional mood in English, because I could can both be conditional and past imperfect in English. And go back and have a look at the imperfect lesson for an example of I could, where it is imperfect. but if you put it with an if, then you know it will be conditional. Okay. So last one then. I will have to, je devrais. But if we put an S on and get I would have to, je devrais, we could also translate that as I should in English. Worth knowing that word as well, because I should can come up quite a lot and is quite a useful word to know. So there's some of the irregular ones that are useful. But basically, that is all there is to the conditional. If you know the future stem and the imperfect ending, you just join them together and you've got the conditional mood. And just remember that the verb in the if clause is usually going to be in the imperfect tense. Okay, in fact, with the conditional, it will always be in the simple conditional. It will always be in the imperfect. There you go.